Back everyone. Was there a middle class in ancient Rome? Interesting to think about. I don't know. That's what Toldinstone's going to give us is the answer. Glad you're here. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you love history. Let's jump into it, shall we? Great channel, by the way. Go subscribe to Toldinstone.
Ancient Rome had nothing like the large middle classes of modern capitalist societies. Outside the elite, most were poor. There was, however, a small but prominent segment of the population poised between affluence and poverty, which exhibited some of the traits and aspirations that we associate with the middle class. Formally, the Roman elite consisted of three social orders: senators, equestrians, and decurions.
I'm not really sure what decurions means. Not 100% even sure what equestrians means. I usually associate equestrian with like horse riding. So.
At a time when most Romans earned less than 1,000 sestertii a year, senators were required to have fortunes of at least 1,000,000. Equestrians had to be worth 500,000. The minimum for decurions, members of the councils that governed provincial cities, was often 100,000 sestertii, though less would suffice in a small settlement. Although the three aristocratic orders only made up about 1% of the population, they controlled, by one recent estimate, almost a quarter of the empire's wealth. According to that same estimate, however, perhaps 10% of those outside the elite could be defined as moderately prosperous. This Roman equivalent of the middle class did not have a collective identity or consciousness. From the perspective of the elite, however, its members shared a lack of respectability. Roman aristocrats liked to believe that wealth was only part of their preeminence. They set great stock in their lineage. They attended the best rhetorical schools. They had, they assured themselves, good taste. Politics was a suitable career for a Roman gentleman.
Yeah, it seems like if you're making 1,000,000.
So was advocacy in the courts. A gentleman might invest in mercantile and industrial enterprises, but only discreetly. He could be denied a place in the Senate if it was known that his wealth derived from such sordid means.
As like a conflict of interest, I'm guessing.
The only really respectable source of income was the sale of produce from landed estates. Virtually every other occupation was unbecoming.
Of course, Cicero here, bro. I see him everywhere. The vulgar professions.
The vulgar professions, according to Cicero, included paid labor, which was akin to slavery, buying and selling, since these involved deceit. The crafts, it was unseemly to work with one's hands, and the production of anything that appeased the base appetites. Actors and dancers were beneath contempt. Architects, doctors, and teachers, on the other hand, were respectable, but such careers were only suitable for freedmen. Some of the jobs, so casually dismissed by Cicero, paid well. Skilled craftsmen could become prosperous, especially if they worked with gold, silver, or jewels. So could merchants who dealt with luxuries, such as spices and silk, or even with commodities like garum. The atrium of Umbricius Scaurus, who owned one of the finest mansions in Pompeii, was splashed with advertisements for his top-grade mackerel sauce.
Advertisements? That's something you don't really think about, is like marketing and advertising and these concepts of like intangibility. Not intangible, that's not even a word. The intangible concepts of selling things going this far back. That's insane to me to think about.
Ultimately, only fine gradations of snobbery separated the lower reaches of the aristocracy from the most prosperous members of the sub-elite. The middle and upper classes are difficult to disentangle even in the archaeological record. At Pompeii, both modest private houses, like the Casa del Ara Massimo, and relatively spacious apartments, such as the Canacula Equestria in the Insula Ariana Poliana, have been described, rightly or wrongly, as middle class. Whether or not these labels were accurate remains unclear. Artifacts like aretine ware, glazed pottery that imitated gold and silver vessels, have also been associated with moderate prosperity.
Middle class.
Ultimately, however, no aspect of material culture can be automatically linked with a middle class.
True.
We can only say that, at Pompeii and many other sites, evidence exists for a substantial group of sub-elite consumers with disposable income. If you have a bit of disposable income,
What a ad.
in the city of Rome, the middle class seems to have consisted largely of freedmen. Although the evidence is skewed by the fact that freedmen were exceptionally likely to build monumental tombs, the prosperity they achieved was real. Many elite families set up slaves as shopkeepers and skilled craftsmen. Once these slaves had bought or been granted their freedom, they maintained close ties, and sometimes business partnerships, with their former owners, giving them an advantage over freeborn competitors. The wealthy freedman was a stock character in Roman literature. Juvenal describes one who owned 5 shops in Rome and earned 400,000 sestertii a year.
Wow.
In Petronius's Satyricon, the freedman Trimalchio claims to be worth 30 million and says that the size of his fortune will be inscribed on his tomb. This was barely satire. The epitaph of a real freedman in Rome, a former dealer of goat skins, enumerated the fruits of his wealth: a house of marble, alms for the poor, and a mausoleum set aside in perpetuity for the descendants of his own former slaves.
Wow.
The tomb of another freedman, trained as a doctor and surgeon, carefully listed the sums he had paid for his liberty, for membership on a civic board, and for benefactions to his adopted city. Many freedmen advertised their occupations on their tombs. The gravestone of Gaius Julius Helius, a cobbler, was graced with shoes. Marcus Virgilius Eurysaces, who made bread for recipients of the public grain dole, had reliefs of baking carved on his mausoleum.
Is that it? That's insanely cool because that's obviously like still standing to this day with what it's worth. Wow. They're proud. That means that they were very proud of what they did. Minus, someone like Cicero, who was like, if you work with your hands, you're just not the right elite status as I am. There's an undertone there. These people were proud of what they did.
Although freedmen were prominent in many places outside Rome, the middle classes of cities close to the frontier tended to be dominated by veterans. Legionaries.
True, because a lot of times the consuls or the generals or whomever the state is would set aside sometimes cities, but more likely plots of land that you get when you retire, almost like a ancient GI Bill, but the GI Bill is referring to real estate.
Earned about as much as skilled craftsmen and received a discharge bonus equivalent to a decade's pay in either cash or land.
Yeah.
Their officers, paid up to 50 times more than regular soldiers, left the army wealthy men. Some veterans made themselves merchants, selling swords or pottery near their former camps. Many more became farmers, often on a substantial scale. A papyrus from Oxyrhynchus in Egypt, for example, mentions a veteran who owned lands with more than a dozen tenants. Another Egyptian veteran, Lucius Belinus Gemellus, had properties in several villages and routinely.
Oh, what is that? That's interesting. That instrument that's right there in the front, where you have these 4 dangling like metal pieces from string or wire on top of this, like, what is that? Interesting.
He sent gifts and bribes to local officials. Like freedmen, veterans often advertised their prosperity with impressive tombs. A well-known example is the temple mausoleum of Lucius Publicius, decked with sphinxes and Corinthian columns, which still dominates the Romano-Germanic Museum of Cologne.
Wow.
Some veterans rose to the rank of town councilors. A former primipillus, first centurion, became a decurion of several cities in Pannonia. Another officer became such a fixture of local government that his adopted city of Capua honored him with a gilded statue. The epitaph of Lucius Gavius Fronto, who
It's a very new city where we're looking at right here on the coast.
had served as a primipillus and camp prefect, records that his son was an important imperial official and that his grandson had been made a Roman senator. For a few families, being middle class was a 1- or 2-generation prelude to joining the elite. But
Okay.
hundreds of thousands never made the leap. They continued to work as craftsmen or farmers, living in comfortable houses.
That's a really nice photo right there. Obviously, it's not a photo; it's a painting or a fresco or something. Guy's using his finger to assert the water out, and it shows you a different time, a different culture, but similar things to how we think about today. This is obviously funny. This is like a prank. This is like an ancient prank. So cool to see. Really cool.
And buying affordable luxuries. Or they settled back, after a brief taste of prosperity, into the anonymous multitudes of the poor. If you're among...
Wow. What a very quaint and simple video to describe so much. It seems that there was a middle class, but it was more of a spectrum of wealth in Rome. If you have any added context, please leave in the comments below. But it seems like if you're a free man, that's the first prerequisite to ever possibly be in middle class. Free man, maybe you're an architect, doctor, teacher, craftsman. You have businesses, you have land. Maybe you're a retired military guy that's worked, whether it be in mercantilism or whether it be in farming, whether it be in just a range of things. That's like the spectrum of middle class. And then once you get a little bit more, whether you're going into politics or you have just a multitude of businesses or you just have really good trade system set up, that gets you into that upper class. And then of course, once you get to the very top, you're in that 1%. But yeah, there was probably no like cut and dry like thresholds to be in middle class. There was more like a spectrum, but majority of people were poor. Majority of people were just not. The income inequality. I have another question for you guys. Now it depends on where you live. It really does. Like you could live in Angola, you can live in Australia, you can live in America. It doesn't matter where you live. But if you are knowledgeable in the Roman society of yesteryear versus today, let's just take Western civilization, as the majority of my viewers are from Western civilization. But if you're from an Eastern civilization, whether it be in the Middle East or the Asian countries, feel free to also chime in. What do you think the income and quality difference is between now and then? Let me know if it's there's a parallel or if there's so much more income inequality back then versus now, or vice versa. That's all we got today. Thank you guys so much. Peace out. Goodbye.